Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight. So, as Andy said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on a few of the conservation challenges and some of the successes in Northern Peru. And I'm doing this with a Naturetrek perspective. So this is based around species that are generally seen on that Northern Peru Naturetrek tour, and that actually going there and seeing them in some ways contributes to their conservation. So here's a quick image of Peru. It's the area located to the left of the image with the massive Amazon basin in the center. And up in the very northwest, you can see a little white desert out on the westernmost point of South America. That is the Satura Desert. And so that's sort of roughly the area we're going to be looking at for Northern Peru. Here's a sort of roadmap of the area of that most of the Northern Peru tour that Naturetrek offer covers. It starts off actually out further into the Amazon basin, in an area with virtually no roads near Iquitos. And then it flies into Tarapoto and it comes across that yellow route, basically finishing up at the city of Chiclayo on the Pacific coast. So basically, I always say it goes from the heart of the Amazon to the Pacific. And some of the places I'm going to talk about on this map here. So let's crack on. So Northern Peru is an incredibly biodiverse area. There's over 1,600 bird species there, 59 country endemics, 150 restricted range endemics, and you can read those. But similar high levels of diversity of other taxa. So there are lots of mammals, there are lots of reptiles and amphibians, because it's the same reasons. It's this sort of Cordilleran chaos in Northern Peru, lots of mountain ranges, lots of dry valleys between them, different habitats. So every 50 kilometers you go along, you completely changed habitat. And that gives rise to this incredible diversity. But it also creates some incredible conservation challenges. So I'm going to start off in some of Northern Peru. This is a mountain that's very special to me. This is the Chapari Reserve. This is the first private conservation area established in Peru, and it's a community-owned conservation area of 34,000 hectares. And this area was set up for two of the species we're going to talk about today. And the first one of those is the Andean bear. A lot of people think of Andean bears, also known as spectacle bears, as being cloud forest animals, and seen on the Paramos and in the cloud forests of the high Andes. Well, that's not really true. That's where generally they are surviving, because it's the place where humans have had least impact. But this species used to occur right down to sea level. And they used to come down and forage on carcasses on the coast. And there are only 2.5 to 10,000 left. This is IUCN data in the world, in quite a fragmented distribution from Venezuela through Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, into Bolivia, and extreme northwestern Argentina. They're threatened by hunting, habitat loss, and fragmentation. But one of the unique things about northwestern Peru is this is the place where the highest density of this bear is found on the planet, in dry forest. So they aren't a cloud forest species. That's probably a suboptimal habitat, but that's where most of their population is forced to be, because humans have hunted them out of these other more accessible habitats. The other good thing about cloud forest from a point of view of a bear watcher is you can see the bears in the dry season. There's no leaves on the tree, their habitat's all grey-brown, and there are black bears in there. So you can see them from quite a long way away. Much more difficult in cloud forest. They're only known in dry forest in 3 localities around the world. Northwestern Peru, some of the arid interandean valleys in southern Peru, near where Jose was talking about, and in some areas of Bolivia. And yeah, the highest density is right around the Chapari Reserve. We studied with camera traps in Chapari quite a long time ago and got surprising number of bears. We did a 25 square kilometers covered in camera traps for a year, and I think we had 15 bears using that area, and people were shocked at that density. But since then, telemetry studies have backed this up, and more ongoing studies there show that there really is quite a good density of bears. So it's a good place to see them, and going to see them helps conserve them. The same habitat is shared by Andean condor. This is a much more widely distributed species. You can see here its range map from Venezuela all the way down to Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego. But this is a species that's population is plummeting. Venezuela basically has none left in it that are resident. There are some right on the Colombian border that drift in and out, but you can't count them twice, and they're kind of in the Colombia numbers, so I'm leaving them there. Colombia has about 140, Ecuador about 50. Peru's just done a survey and got 301 as their estimate. That's probably a slight underestimate, I suspect, but I've always thought the 300 to 500. Similar numbers in Bolivia. The big unknown is Argentina and Chile. Some people have said 5,000 between the two. Because the border is right down the top of the Andes, it's really hard to give a population estimate for each country. But basically a global population of maximum 6,000. And some people suspect that the Argentina and Chile number of 5,000 may be a big overestimate now, because it's very easy to overcount condors. What's the problem? Well, we did some research in Peru as we were getting a national strategy going, and we found there was an incredible trade in selling condor body parts. So you got a guy here playing a flute made out of a condor wing bone. At the top, you've got a dead condor on a shaman's wall. You've got condor feathers for sale as individuals, as souvenirs, and this is in the Sacred Valley of the Incas in the town of Pisac, or wrapped up in these Palo Santo pieces of wood with a crystal rammed in the base for sort of alternative healing and taking out bad energy and all that. Things that I'm not very tolerant of those beliefs, I'm afraid, because I've seen the damage it's doing by trading the slowest reproducing bird on Earth. And that's the fundamental challenge for the condor. It is the slowest reproducing bird on Earth. So perhaps adult pairs first breeding at 7, not breeding successfully till 10 or 11, and then some pairs on the Pacific coast perhaps only breeding every 7th year. Another big problem in Peru, much to our surprise, was the thing called the Yagua Fiesta. Yagua means blood in Quechua, and it's the blood festival. And it was made famous in a book by a guy called Jose Maria Arguedas. Ironically, in his book, there isn't actually a bullfight with a condor on it. They mentioned briefly that it happened occasionally, but there was a massive resurgence of this tradition that had virtually died out of catching a condor and putting it on a bull and fighting the bull, then releasing the condor again. The condor was a sacred bird for the local peoples. The Spanish landowners in the colonial time probably brought in bulls, and so it's a kind of hybrid festival that was perhaps to do with releasing the sacred birds so that the local people fight the bull to get it. We did a survey of this because when we first did the first national condor plan, we didn't believe there would be, we thought this was an irrelevance. But when I moved to Cusco, I saw a couple of posters up on walls in remote villages advertising these things. So I started going to them. And we started going around all the villages and asking people, and we found there were up to 59 of these going on a year. Mostly for religious festivals, for St. Francisco of Assisi's Day in early October, who's the patron saint of animals, which was kind of bizarre. I actually wrote to the Pope at the time. He never replied, but asking him if he could ask the Cardinal to have a word and try and stop it going on. But whether anything actually happened, I don't know. But it fortunately now the government, when we published a paper on this and brought this thing to light, and we talked with some of the local mayors who got really involved and said, well, yeah, there aren't many condors left, and it's virtually stopped now. So the government kind of came down hard on it as well, which was good. But I did go to quite a few. It was a bizarre and fairly horrific kind of spectacle. Here you can see one of the last ones I went to, because we went to try and see what the impact on the condors was. And yeah, here you've got an adult female condor tied to a bull, and at the back you see those guys beside the blue wall. There's the two, one of them's a policeman. Actually, two of them are policemen, and so the police and all the authorities will be there. But since the government has intervened, this has virtually stopped. But these threats, what have they meant in Peru? we managed to trawl through some of the old literature. There's very few places where there's historic counts of condors. This is why it's so important to keep good records and actually make them publicly available. So if anyone out there's got good ancient records of numbers of condors seen, please stick them in something like eBird so they're available. But we found 4 places where we had historic counts, a number of places where the bird had gone extinct. So you can't calculate a decline rate, but doing a bit of simple sort of population dynamics maths, which the equations at the bottom for anyone who's interested, you can calculate decline rates. And I've marked on the map the relative decline rates you can see. So the area where it's down in the south center, where it's a minus 8.7, that's an annual decline rate in condor population. Calculated from this curve. That's the green line at the Colca Canyon, perhaps the most famous place to watch condors in Peru. And it's an 8.7 decline rate. That's the area just north of there is where all the Jaguar fiestas happen. And so we got an average decline rate of 4.2% across the country. But you can see that it really, no, sorry, 4.7 was the average. That's not up there. Annual decline rate. So nearly 5% annual decline rate for the slowest reproducing bird in the world. So there is a massive problem. And in some areas, we've seen declines further. So the minus 3.6, that's the Illescas Peninsula up in the northwest. A recent survey had none. Then another recent survey found 4. This is an area that in the 1970s, people were seeing 200 at a time. And so, you know, it's that shifting baseline syndrome really isn't a problem. But fortunately, these 2 major anthropogenic threats have now been tackled by the government and the people. And now this is becoming very popular. People going and watching condors, and the local people are getting on board with this. Restaurants, hotels, etc., are realizing the value. More and more watch points are being sort of available in Peru, and people around them are getting on board with protecting the condor, which is obviously very good news, because it would be a shame to lose this absolutely iconic species from the Andes. That's there is a pair of condors actually. I watched them. We watched them copulate on the Naturetrek tour in Chapari in October, I guess it was, or early November. We saw them display and mating, and we think they're building a nest now. I was there a couple of weeks ago. There's another bird that's also in the Chapari Reserve. This is the white-winged guan. This was one of the other reasons this reserve was established, probably the main reason, actually. The Neotropical Bird Club gave a small grant to help identify a site for a reintroduction project. This was an area where the guan we knew would have been till about 40 years ago, but was now absent from, and it was chosen for the reintroduction site. And this is what it looks like. You can see these dry hillsides and a strip of permanent evergreen forest along a watercourse. These habitats are now very rare because permanent water in a desertic, dry forest landscape is where people settle. It's where there are people, it's where there's dogs, it's where there's livestock, it's where the people cut the timber, etc. So these areas get destroyed very quickly, and they're the absolute critical habitat for the guan. And so this was a species that was believed to be extinct for about 118 years. It was rediscovered in 1977 by a local guy, reported it to a wealthy landowner who had put out the word in the village, please, if anyone sees this. And that landowner, Gustavo del Solar was his name, he managed to take some eggs, hatch them in captivity under chickens, and then he established a captive breeding program. And then the 1999, they were getting ready for a reintroduction. The captive breeding program had increased enough, and they were looking for a place. And that's when I began to get a little bit involved, and the Chapari community, or it's called Chongoyapes, yeah, we can do something with this, and we'll create a little reserve. And everyone who was involved, including myself, thought, oh, they might say 1,500 hectares. And suddenly they came back and said, yeah, 34,412 hectares of our land will give us a reserve. And we had to create a new law to get it recognized by the Peruvian government as the first protected area. And then there was the reintroduction there from 2003 to 2005. We did the survey on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and the 27th of December this year, and we counted 57 in the main part of the reserve. There's 2 small outlying patches that are very remote that are going to be counted, probably have been counted by now, but I haven't got the data yet. And that's the largest single population. That's 57 adults. We didn't count chicks. And that's the largest single population anywhere. The only other protected population in has 22 in a state protected area in the next valley. And this has led to the success of the Chaparral because, that's right, the neighboring communities, there's 51 community nearby, 6 in another, etc. So it's spreading out from this area. And this has led to it being downlisted from critically threatened to endangered. And one of the big incentives for the people there is tourism. This was Christmas Day this year. I went up to check on a nest we'd found a couple of days before and found here the chick had hatched, the first chick had hatched and had already left the nest. You can still see the egg tooth, the little white bit on the end of the beak. This is probably about 2 hours out of the egg, a baby white-winged guan this year. And so this is in the community. On the right-hand most person is a guy called Thomas, who's a community guide who earns a significant part of his living now taking tourists who come to see white-winged guan. This group are actually watching a white-winged guan. So now I'm going to flip over to perhaps one of the most sought-after highlights of the Northern Peru birding route, which is the marvelous spatule tail. One of the only birds, I believe, that the male only has 4 tail feathers and the female still has a normal 10, like other hummingbirds. I was thinking this the other day. I can't think of any. There are birds that have got weird numbers of tail feathers, but I can't think of another one where it's sexually dimorphic. If anyone can, please stick something in the comments. I'd love to know. And this is a bird with a tiny restricted range, about 8,700 square kilometers on the left bank of the Utcubamba River Valley, which is a side valley of the Maranhão. There's less than 1,000 individuals and it's decreasing. It's threatened by habitat loss, fragmentation, also hunting. People have long believed that the hearts of the hummingbird dried up into a powder could be an aphrodisiac, and there was slingshot hunting for it. Fortunately, education campaigns by a local NGO are helping to work with that. And there's some habitat protection initiatives, and those are quite often associated with ecotourism. So on the tour, we actually visit 3 different sites where this bird occurs, and we don't really need to go to all 3 sites. We pop in quickly and make a payment because it incentivizes protecting the habitat, and also no one ever gets tired of looking at them and trying to get a better photo of this amazing hummingbird. There are some other challenges. Peruvian plant cutter is one of the fastest declining birds in Peru. It's widespread in very arid, groundwater fed mesquite forests, many of which have places like this. This is adobe pyramids from ancient civilizations within them. So it's these amazing forests that there's only a tiny amount left of. It's highly fragmented now. There's a massive disease going through one of the most important trees, what used to be called Prosopis, the mesquite. Now they changed the taxonomy, Neltuma. There's massive problems with invasive tamarisk. There's illegal logging and charcoal production at the sites. As of yet, it's only in one protected area, and I'm not sure how good the population is there. I don't believe the counts, knowing that area quite well, that some people have said there might be that many, and I'm worried the habitat is transitioning with and the invasive species and the die-off of the trees. So there are still challenges out there, and I'm not quite sure how this one gets protected. But hopefully there will be some solutions. There are people working on it now. I chose those species. I can for much longer, several others. Here are some of the other species we could talk about. Long-whiskered owlet, the very rare grey-bellied comet, really only confined to one canyon now, and the wonderful success story of the wattled curassow that we also see on the tour. Their community conservation with a local lodge working with the community. When I first went there, we had to get up and walk in total darkness 2 hours and maybe hear one. This year, we saw 7 from boats, and they're getting tamer, and it really is a massive success. And it shows what the impact of your visits can be. Helping protect these habitats and incentivize local people to look after the wildlife of this incredibly biodiverse area. So, well, for listening, and I hope to see you all in Northern Peru soon.